Hey, you. Are you looking for excellent audiobook recommendations? Well, look no further. You're in the right place. Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. Today is my third installment in my audiobook series. The first two, Where to Source Audiobooks Outside of Audible, and my favorite 12 narrators will be linked in the cards and in the description below. Go check those out if you missed them. Today I'm going to be recommending memoirs that are narrated by their author. Memoirs are so personal, and I really enjoy when an author can tell their story. Not all authors are good at it, but the ones I'm going to recommend really elevate the listening experience. I've got 18 to discuss, and I will include a small sample to see if you like the narration as well. Also, don't forget to stay tuned because I'm going to be discussing a giveaway at the end of my video. I found that memoirs that I enjoy fall into one of four categories: a difficult family life, disability and mental health, cults and religions, and funny memoirs. So let's start with difficult family life. The first I'd like to recommend is Women We Buried, Women We Burned by Rachel Louise Snyder. I first discovered her when I read her investigative journalist book, No Visible Bruises, which was about domestic violence. Unfortunately, her memoir is quite a heavy and traumatic read as well. Her mother dies when she is 8 years old, and her father quickly remarries a woman who is an evangelical Christian, and they force the entire family to convert. This is quite traumatic for her because she is told that her Jewish mother is now burning in hell, and that if she doesn't convert, that she will be left behind by her family. She is eventually kicked out of her house as a teenager and has to make it on her own. She endures many hardships, but succeeds despite them. I found her story heartbreaking, but inspiring. Let's listen to a sample.
By day, the sea was a deep indigo blue, all the way to the horizon. I knew because I spent hours in a crevice on the starboard side of an upper deck, swinging my legs over the side of the ship, watching the water ribbon as we sliced through it.
Becoming by Michelle Obama had a ton of hype when it first came out, and for good reason. She is a very good storyteller. She talks about her life growing up in Chicago, meeting Barack Obama, the behind-the-scenes campaigning, and eventual residing in the White House. She was initially quite reserved about Obama running for president, but by talking to the people at several town halls, she realized that he was the leader that they needed. She had a fascinating life, and if you're even a teeny bit interested, you should definitely check out her memoir. Let's listen.
Now I think it's one of the most useless questions an adult can ask a child. What do you want to be when you grow up? As if growing up is finite. As if at some point you become something, and that's the end.
Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. Michelle Zauner is half Korean and half white. When her mother, who is Korean, dies, she feels like she's losing part of her identity. One of the ways that she connected with her mother was through traditional Korean food. This is beautifully written and definitely made me crave some of the food that she talks about. Let's listen.
Thinking of all the hours that Mom and I spent at the kitchen table, folding minced pork and chives into the thin dough. Sobbing near the dry goods, asking myself, am I even Korean anymore if there's no one left to call and ask which brand of seaweed we used to buy?
Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt is probably the first memoir I adored, and the audiobook is even better. Frank was born in the United States with a few of his siblings as well. However, when he is 4, his baby sister dies, and the mother, who is just overwhelmed by grief, they decide to move back to Ireland to have some family support. His father is an alcoholic, and his mother basically just stops functioning after her daughter's death. It falls to Frank as the eldest child to try and keep the family together. I love his Irish accent and the way he infuses humor to balance some of the more horrific parts of his life. Let's listen.
When I look back on my childhood, I wonder how I survived it all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while.
The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls is a memoir of incredible childhood neglect. Both of her parents have quite a few issues, and neither really wanted to take care of their kids. Jeanette recalls when she was 3, trying to cook hot dogs on a stove, but instead she got badly burned. Her parents moved around a lot, they didn't have very much money, and they often went hungry. One scene that is vividly burned into my head is when there was no food in the house, just a small lump of margarine. And instead of letting her kids have that, the mother decides to eat it herself. Jeanette was able to succeed despite all of her early challenges, and I found her story inspiring yet heartbreaking. Let's listen.
When I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. It was just after dark. A blustery March wind whipped the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up.
The last memoir in this category is North of Normal by Sia Sunrise Person. She grew up on a commune with her grandparents, her aunts, and her mother. This also is a story of child neglect. She grew up in a tent in the Canadian wilderness. She ate whatever meat her grandfather could shoot, and she was incredibly neglected by all of the adults on this commune. They were too busy doing drugs and having sex with visitors. They refused to take her to doctors when she got ill, and she had 2 near-death experiences. It's an infuriating memoir, but incredibly unique. Let's listen.
It had been a long winter. The meat from my grandfather's last big hunt had run out long ago, and he had promised he would try to get a bear, my favorite.
This next category is disability and mental health. The first I'd like to recommend is The Invisible Kingdom by Megan O'Rourke. This is her memoir of becoming chronically ill and searching for a diagnosis and eventual treatment. But of course, chronic illness is never that straightforward. It took her ages to get an accurate diagnosis, and she explores how chronic illness, especially invisible illness, is overlooked and not well understood. She talks about the ableism she faces and what she wishes able-bodied people could understand about her. It's an excellent piece of disability literature, and I highly recommend. Let's listen.
After I reached my sickest, I dreaded waking because my symptoms were always worse in the morning, and because I knew the day would be full of suffering without explanation.
You may have heard of Jenny Lawson from her famous blog, The Bloggess. Furiously Happy is the best of her 3 books. She is a very quirky individual who suffers not only physical health challenges, but also mental health with depression and anxiety. Her depression makes her feel so low, but in turn, she also has the capability of high levels of joy and happiness as well. Hence, Furiously Happy. Her struggles are incredibly relatable, and she infuses her writing with lots of humor. Let's listen.
You have to confront those decapitated heads because you can't grow without acknowledging that we are all made up from the weirdness that we try to hide from the rest of the world.
Darkness Visible by William Styron. If you don't recognize that name, he is the author who wrote the book Sophie's Choice, which I loved when I read several years ago. This is his slim little memoir of his experience of depression. He was very healthy through most of his life, but became depressed as an older adult. Even though this was written 35 years ago, it still feels relevant and fresh today. This book is less than 100 pages, though, so I won't say any more, but I found it to be an incredibly worthwhile read. Let's listen.
I recall saying to myself that when I left Paris for New York the next morning, it would be a matter of forever. I was shaken by the certainty with which I accepted the idea that I would never see France again.
The last in this category is Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig. This is a wonderful memoir written by a disability activist and full-time wheelchair user. Sick of either the inspirational stories or the pitiable sad sack, she wanted to show what just an ordinary person who had a disability, what they have to face in their life. There are lots of discussions of ableism, lack of safety nets, and how capitalism equates productivity with worth and how messed up that is. I learned a lot, and she made the material incredibly accessible. Ba-dum-bum. Let's listen.
So many stories that felt entirely singular, deeply personal, and painfully, wholeheartedly honest. I'm pretty sure my eyes popped out on springs like a cartoon when I realized there were people who wanted to listen.
Okay, switching categories to religions and cults, I'd like to recommend The House of My Mother by Sherry Frank. This is her memoir, growing up in the spotlight on the internet as part of her family's YouTube channel. They became very popular family life content creators, and Sherry and her siblings were used for likes. She was never able to have a private moment to herself, whether she failed a test or was rejected by a crush or started her first period. None of it belonged to her. All of it was fodder for the channel. The reason this is under cults is because soon her mother became enamored with a cult leader. This cult leader absolutely hated children, and their lives went from bad to worse. Fortunately for Sherry and her eldest brother, they were able to get out of the house quite quickly, but her 4 youngest siblings were held captive to this physical and mental abuse. In a stroke of irony, it was actually the channel subscribers who first started calling out the abuse and were able to get the ball rolling to get law enforcement involved to protect these kids. This is an incredibly triggering book, so please look up trigger warnings if you need to, but it's incredibly worthwhile, and I definitely recommend. Let's listen.
Ruby, who had turned my life into a surreal version of The Truman Show for her social media disciples. Ruby, who had subjected me and my siblings to her twisted interpretation of crime and punishment all our lives, until Jody came along, adding terrifying new flavors of sadism to the regime.
Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayari. This is a middle grade memoir focused on Daniel growing up in Iran. When he was 10 or 11 years old, his mother was found to be practicing Christianity. The state religion in Iran is Islam, and they put a fatwa on her head. So she and her 2 children fled Iran. They spent some time in a refugee camp, but eventually settled in the United States. He is a wonderful storyteller, and I really enjoyed listening to his story. Let's listen.
All Persians are liars, and lying is a sin. That's what the kids in Mrs. Miller's class think, but I'm the only Persian they've ever met, so I don't know where they got that idea.
How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair is a wonderful memoir growing up in Jamaica under the cult of Rastafari. While there aren't a lot of hard and fast rules with Rastafari, the main one is that the Father is the Godhead. He is the arbiter of what is good and bad, and he must have the final say in everything. When she did not cooperate, he would physically abuse her. This is her memoir, Escaping the Cult, and it was poetry that led her a way out. Her writing is incredibly poetic and gorgeous, and her accent transported me to Jamaica. I am picking a clip that does not have her speaking in patois because I wanted to make sure it was well understood, but just know that she speaks in patois in a thick accent in parts. Let's listen.
Now, more than 2 centuries later, I felt the chattering night wearing me mad, a cold shiver running down my bones. A girl unable to face herself.
Okay, so those last 3 categories are pretty hard. Let's end on a good note, and I will talk about the funny memoirs. The first I'd like to recommend is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. She narrates her story, starting with her late-in-life diagnosis of autism. She reflects on when she was growing up and her frequent meltdowns that she would have, which often resulted in the destruction of property. She had a variety of jobs and even spent some time in a mental hospital. She's had some very difficult moments, but she tells her story in such a wry and witty way, equal parts gut-busting and gut-wrenching. Her gorgeous Scottish accent lent this audiobook even more charm. Let's listen.
One time my granda had his leg amputated and Dad mentioned it as breezily as you would if you were making small talk about the weather. Granda's in hospital and we think he's getting his leg cut off. This was followed by a call the next day with a matter of fact, well, Granda's dead.
Sticking with autistic comedians, I'd also like to recommend 10 Steps to Nanette by Hannah Gadsby. They are such a refreshing voice in comedy, discussing quite serious topics deftly with humor. They face many traumatic situations, so look up trigger warnings if you need to. They grew up in Tasmania, where it was illegal to be queer. They discussed the homophobia that they faced and some of their mental health issues. Their comedy special, Nanette, is truly one of a kind, balancing dark topics with humor. I guess comedy really is tragedy plus time, and their accent is a joy to listen to. Let's listen.
Technically, this is my second book. But I wouldn't bother trying to find a copy of my first effort, as it was only published in an edition of one, and I've misplaced it.
Several years ago, there was a comedy musical show called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, in which Rachel Bloom plays the titular character. She is so extra and so over the top that I decided to pick up her memoir and essays called I Want to Be Where the Normal People Are. She is a full-on theater nerd and discusses bullying and depression and her OCD. And if you're wondering, does she randomly break into song like on the show? Yes. Yes, she does. She is just so likable and quirky. I suppose some people might find her annoying, but I found her incredibly charming. Her dramatic retellings made me laugh out loud. Let's listen.
Let's face it, if you're a person of substance, you are going to get bullied in school. But instead of telling yourself that the bullies are just jealous, they're not, or trying to learn revenge telekinesis in time for the big dance, you won't, I've tried, it's hard, here are some more out-of-the-box ways to deal with bullying.
I mentioned there were memoirs that would overlap into different categories, and this book kind of overlaps 50-50. It's funny, but it's also about religion. And that is Comedy Sex God by Pete Holmes. This is his humorous look at his life growing up as an evangelical Christian and leaving that faith and looking into spiritualism from the guru Ram Dass. There are quite a few laugh out loud moments, but he also offers some probing theological and existential questions. The first half is much funnier than the second, but both are needed to really understand Pete. Let's listen.
The story goes, they met in a bar in Cape Cod, and after dating for a few months in their late 30s, my mom told my dad to shit or get off the pot. My dad chose shit, and 3 years later, I was born.
And the last funny memoir that I'm going to talk about is James Acaster's Classic Scrapes by James Acaster. This is a funny account of his life, talking about comedy gigs that went badly, getting into a prank war with a child, and some of the different bands that he was a part of. He has a willingness to try new things, but that doesn't always work for him. I found myself laughing out loud several times. Let's listen.
During the daytime when Freeline Whip didn't have band practice, I was so bored. No matter how hard I worked on the band, I always found myself with a lot of spare time, and with my newfound fear of dying, I was now trying to fill that time up with anything I could.
Okay, let's talk about the giveaway. So I have a Libro FM referral link that I leave in my description of my videos. And every time one of you signs up, I get a free audiobook credit, which is just so much fun. I have been on Booktube for nearly 3 years. It will be 3 years on June 11th. And I've decided as a celebration, I would like to give away one of my free credits to one of you lucky people. All you have to do is click in my description and there will be a link to the giveaway. You'll include your name, your email address, and the audiobook, title, and author that you would like to win. I will be picking the winner at the end of June. And I am a small channel, so you should enter because you'll have pretty good odds. Definitely go to Libro FM and check out what they have and what you would like to win. So I hope I've piqued your interest in some of these audiobooks. If so, let me know which ones you're interested in, and I'd always love to hear what memoirs you love. I can always add it to my ever-towering TBR. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.